Good day, everyone. We are Francis Geronimo, Hannah Lim, and Al Lumasag from BSE Forward. We are here to present our thesis entitled A Road for Inclusive Growth, a panel regression analysis of women-related variables to economic growth of the Southeast Asian economies from 2016 to 2021. For our background of the study, women are unable to have the same access to education, rights, participation, and opportunities the other gender had. As men are prioritized in the society, it steered them to be perceived as dominant. Undeniably, women are part of the human capital, which plays a vital role in the economy, and an economy that aren't efficiently utilizing its capital cannot achieve its maximum potential in terms of growth and development. As women and their well-being is a substantial factor in the economy in terms of human capital, an investigation on how women's economic participation, women's health, and the young age-dependent population affects the Southeast Asian economies. Moving on to the women's fact and figures. Most of these facts are showed that women are oppressed. However, here are some pertinent facts. Reports from 2022 Gender Gap Index showed that Southeast Asian economy, the Philippines ranked first, followed by Singapore, Vietnam, Indonesia, Cambodia, Malaysia, Brunei, and the last is Myanmar. And 168 years is the estimated timeline to achieve the gender parity in Southeast Asia. Lastly, women live 5 years longer than men. Our objective of the study is to evaluate the behavior and trend of the economy measured by the gross national income, female labor force, female life expectancy in the young age dependent population on the Southeast Asian economies in 2016 to 2021. Second is to find out if there is a significant relationship between the Southeast Asian economy and the explanatory variables. Third is to find out if there is a significant effect on the Southeast Asian economy of the female labor force, female life expectancy, and the young age dependent population when variables are taken individually and taken collectively. Lastly, to know which among the panel regression model is appropriate to be used. For our theoretical framework, we have three theories to support our study. The first is the endogenous growth theory. The population growth and subsequent increase in the labor force have a positive relationship to economic growth. A larger workforce implies productive workers, hence contributing to the economy's growth. It also suggests that based on the idea that improvements in technology, innovation, knowledge, and human capital can lead to an increase in productivity, which positively affects the economy. For feminist theory suggests that this theory does not merely focus on women. Its purpose is to give awareness of what the oppressed feels and looks like, aim to shed light on how the world could be when there is equality and justice for all. And lastly, for our demographic transition theory, economic growth is slowed down by the population growth because of high birth rates and the dependency population. So the decline on both gives the countries the opportunity to achieve economic growth. For our conceptual framework, the researchers constructed an input process output diagram to highlight the framework where the researchers flows to know the relationship and impacts on the economy of selected women-related variables on the Southeast Asian economies from 2016 to 2021. Under input is the independent variable female labor force, female life expectancy, and young age-dependent population. Process includes panel regression estimation model, diagnostic test, model determination test, assumption test. And output is a dependent variable gross national income. We came up with the function of GNI is a function of female labor force, female life expectancy, and the young age-dependent population. The extended relationship between the independent and dependent variables are as follows. Female labor force and female life expectancy was assumed to have a positive effect on the economy, while the young age-dependent population was anticipated to have a negative relationship to the economy. The RRL will now be discussed by Mr. Al Lumasa.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Alumasag. The collected literatures and studies presented a positive relationship between female labor force and the economic growth. Ustabas and Gulsoy, Chai, and Mohammed provided evidences that the mentioned variables are positively correlated. Egbuluno and Eliuno, Mohammed and Chai studied a single country, Nigeria, Sudan, and Germany, respectively, proving the relationship that female labor force has a positive impact with economic growth. Using cross-sectional data na Chiang Mai, Gemilui, and Yinusa, Bintoro, Apia, and Urama, reinforce the positive impact in their respective regional studies. Lim et al. Used the labor force participation gap between male and female in the regions of the Philippines, and the result emphasized that reduction of the gap in the labor force made the economy productive. At a long run, na Chiang Mai, Ornelia, and Oprasen, Mohammed Aydinbas, and Unloglu and Kalik et al. Gave empirical evidences of women's role to make the economy grow in the long run. Further, the International Labour Organization, Albert and Vismanos, and Cabegan and Gadi showed women's potential to be channeled for economic growth. Young age-dependent population have a negative impact on the economy. In the studies presented by Jadwab et al., Lee and Shin, Rositia, and Rodesby, Ahmad and Shah all yields that youth dependency negatively impacts the economy. Meanwhile, Sahima et al. Concluded that the young age-dependent population only has a negative impact on the long run. On the other hand, Kaneda et al. Focused on finding the cause of increasing dependency ratio, provide description on the country's status of dependency on various countries, and how it slows down the economy. For our research methodology, this research used balanced panel data analysis to analyze the relationship between women-related variables and the economy of Southeast Asia. Panel regression models are based on the panel data set. It consists of data that includes cross-section data and time series data. Using panel data allowed different intercepts and slope coefficients to exist in each individual and time period. Panel data regression has three different estimation methods: the pooled ordinary least squares, the fixed effect model, and the random effect model. This study involved both types of statistical treatment. The descriptive to assess the relationship and its severity and how the independent variables affect the dependent variables, and inferential to investigate the connection between the variables and provide inferences and conclusion based on the results of the given data. For the sources of data, gross national income is in billion US dollars, sourced from the World Bank. The data of the female labor force was in million, measured by the combined number of females employed and unemployed collected from the International Labor Organization. Female life expectancy was in years by the average life mortality of the population, which is gathered from the United Nations Population Division, and the young age dependent population data was measured from the percentage of 0 to 14 years old population to the total population, and it came from the UN Population Division. For the results and discussion, the correlation of the gross national income and female labor force in the Southeast Asian economies has a computed Pearson of 0.888, implying a very strong positive correlation between the variables at 5% significance level with a p-value of less than 0.001, therefore rejecting the null hypothesis that there is an insignificant correlation between women's economic participation and economic growth in the Southeast Asian economies. The correlation of gross national income and female life expectancy in the Southeast Asian economy had a computed Pearson of 0.17, implying a very weak positive correlation between the variables. At 5% significance level with a p-value of 0.219, we fail to reject the null hypothesis that there is an insignificant correlation between the female life expectancy and the Southeast Asian economy. The correlation of the gross national income and the young age-dependent population in the Southeast Asian economy had a computed Pearson of negative 0.372, implying a weak negative correlation between the variables. At 5% significance level with a p-value of 0.006, we failed to reject the null hypothesis that there is an insignificant correlation between the young age-dependent population and the Southeast Asian economy. To maximize the time, we will now head to the model diagnostic test. The child test results showed a p-value of 0.00, indicating the rejection of the null hypothesis that there is no structural change between the Southeast Asian economy and the woman-related variables. Hence, there is a structural change in the data between the Southeast Asian economy and the woman related variable. Thus, the preferred model was the fixed effect model. The p-value of the Bruce-Pagan test has a p-value of 0.00, which was less than the 5% significance level, therefore rejecting the null hypothesis that the variance of the combined effect of the Southeast Asian economy specific error and time error equals to zero. Hence, the random effect was more appropriate than the pooled OLS. The p-value of the Haussmann test showed a 0.004, which was lower than the 5% significance level. Therefore, we failed to reject the null hypothesis that the unique errors and the regressors in the model are uncorrelated. Hence, the fixed effect model was preferred over the random effect model. To continue the results and discussion, here is Ms. Hannah Lim.
So based on the results of model diagnostic test, fixed effect model was the most appropriate model to be used among the pooled, fixed, and random effect model. The econometric model of this research is as follows. Gross national income equals intercept of the reference region plus the partial regression coefficient of FLBRF plus the partial regression coefficient of FLXR minus the partial regression coefficient of YGAGE plus the economic specific dummy variables representing the Southeast Asian economies, plus the error term. In the model, the researchers used Singapore as the reference region as it ranked middle on the gross national income among Southeast Asia. Singapore's intercept reference economy was 329.12 with a t-statistics of zero point 0.6 and a p-value of 0.55, while female labor force had a computed partial regression coefficient of 30.82 with a t-statistics of 6.87 above the 2.0076 critical t-value at 5% level of significance, and a p-value of 0.00, rejecting the null hypothesis that female labor force have a significant impact on the Southeast Asian economy, while female life expectancy had a calculated partial coefficient of 1.41 with a t-statistics of 0.22 and a 1.0076 critical t-value at 5% significance level, and the 0.82 p-value, which says that the null hypothesis that female life expectancy has a significant impact on Southeast Asian economy was failed to be rejected. Then the young age-dependent population had a computed partial regression of negative 14.22 with a statistics of negative 2.39 below the negative 2.0076 critical t-value at 5% significance level and a p-value of 0.02, rejecting the null hypothesis that young age-dependent population have an insignificant impact on the Southeast Asian economy. The other significant economy-specific intercept relative to Singapore were Thailand with negative 290.86 at the statistics of negative 3.53 and a p-value of 0.00, while Indonesia with negative 641.49 and the statistics of negative 2.53 and a p-value of 0.02, while Vietnam with negative 632.17 and the statistics of negative 4.52 with a p-value of 0.00. The computed F statistics was 815.076 above the critical F value of 2.7862. The null hypothesis that the collective impact of the explanatory variables have an insignificant impact on the Southeast Asian economy has been rejected. The coefficient of multiple determination, or the R squared, had a coefficient value of 0.9953, and the more reliable measure, the adjusted R squared, was 0.9941, meaning that 99.41% of the portion of the variance in the Southeast Asian economy was explained by the women-related variables. So for the test of assumption, the test of multicollinearity or centered VIF of female labor force was at 1.23, female life expectancy was at 1.12, and the young age dependent population was at 1.12. All values are less than 10, hence severe multicollinearity does not exist in the model. For the test of for the test of normality, Jack Pair had a coefficient of 5.52 with a p-value of 0.06, which was greater than the 5% significance level, implying that these residuals were normally distributed. The test of autocorrelation, the Durbin-Watson, was 1.429 between the lower and upper limit values of 1.4 421 and 1.674. It did not fall between the critical value of 1.674 and 2.326, but the result shows that there's no strong evidence of autocorrelation. So, to conclude this research, women's economic participation in the young age dependent population have a significant relationship with the Southeast Asian economy. And women's economic participation had a positive effect on the Southeast Asian economy. The young age dependent population have a negative impact with the Southeast Asian economy. Meanwhile, women's economic participation, women's health, and the young age dependent population collectively impacted the economy. And based on the model diagnostic tests done by the researchers, the fixed effect model was the preferred and appropriate model. And Indonesia and Vietnam have a negative fixed effect, which reflects the unproductive female labor force and higher young age dependent population, and lower female life expectancy. Meanwhile, Thailand has a positive fixed effect, which reflects the productive female labor force, lower young age dependent population, and high female life expectancy. So, for the recommendation of this study, first is the grassroots consultation to know the determinants of the barriers affecting women's participation in the economy, and the implementation of pre-existing legislations of gender-based policies. Next is the increased incentives to encourage women to stay in the labor force while providing them training of skilling, and then entrepreneurship and livelihood programs for women. Then the formulation of additional metrics for the informal sector in the Southeast Asian region. Lastly is for future researchers and endeavors, explore the long-term impact of variables to the economy. So that concludes our research. Thank you and happy International Women's Month.
We are now open to the panelists' questions, recommendations, suggestions. Thank you very much.